Hi and welcome to the first episode of TheKETOPod, the pod that dives deep in the area of ketogenic diets and everything related to ketosis and ketones. My name is Martina Johansson and I'm a Swedish biohacker, author, science editor, and keto enthusiast. And today we're going to discuss insulin, ketosis, calories, and weight loss. Is a state of ketosis really necessary for weight loss? Does calories have any importance at all? And how should you deal with weight plateaus during a strict low-carb diet when it feels like you're doing everything you possibly could but still feel stuck? That and a couple of more things are going to be discussed in today's episode. This keto pod is built around a new concept that I've developed because my golden rule is to be short, accurate, and to the point. Some parts of this pod might be a bit heavy on the science, but you can check my blog highfatfitness.com to get a transcript of the most crucial parts and to get links and lists of web pages, scientific papers, and other related stuff. So let's dive in. One interesting thing that I've found is that there's still some dubious information about insulin and weight loss. Blood sugar and insulin is the sole core of LCHF, low carb, high fat, or ketogenic diet. And as a rule, we want to keep our blood sugar as stable as possible and never let it fluctuate. The insulin hypothesis is that increased insulin for longer periods of time makes us fat. And this is the agenda behind several books on the matter, such as Why We Get Fat with Gary Taubes, for instance. And what we do know is that insulin is an anabolic hormone with the ability to store fat in both muscle and fat tissue. We can see that type 2 diabetics that treat their diabetes with insulin increase their body weight little by little every year and that they have increasingly harder to lose weight. In the fitness industry, insulin has been a tool for decades to increase mass and manipulate body composition. And this is all anecdotal evidence, but this is still something that we have been able to observe for decades. And I have been following a low-carb, high-fat diet for 7 years now, and I have always bought into the insulin hypothesis, and I have kind of arranged my diet around that information. But this pod wouldn't be interesting if I just agreed with myself, so today I'm going to investigate the opposite side. There's actually scientific papers that proves that high insulin or insulin resistance can be beneficial or at least neutral for the body weight. And this is actually the reason why the insulin hypothesis is still being discussed, because there's been like kids and teenagers and even specific indigenous people like the Pima Indians, for instance, that are practically insulin resistant but not overweight. Another observation has been that skinny people oftentimes have a stronger insulin response than overweight people. The skinny people have higher peaks but also lower minimum values, and I can totally relate to this because I've always been very skinny myself. I was super skinny as a kid, and I really experienced having like hypoglycemia quite often, and I also had to go to the school canteen, like an hour before the other kids because I was so hypoglycemic and just couldn't stand it anymore. And an explanation to that could be that like a really high insulin response must be followed by a high glucagon response, and glucagon is one of the most fat-burning hormones we know. So yeah, I can totally buy into that. Overweight people or obese people, they have more of an all-time high when it comes to both insulin and blood sugar. And Asians seem to differ from this because they have a tendency to develop diabetes and insulin resistance without being particularly fat. They can have like a small amount of body fat and still get diabetic. So I do think that there's some kind of genetic component for how much a person can handle when it comes to toxins, sugar, stress, etc. I'm not really into genetic testing because I do think they have their flaws, but sugar is toxic for our blood vessels, and it's also reactive and can interact with fats and proteins to build complex that ages us. This is called advanced glycation end products, and these complexes are basically composed of inhibited proteins glued together by sugar. Proteins are signal molecules in the body, both inside and outside of the cells, And when they can't perform their tasks because they're bound up in sugar complexes, the cells can't function properly and it leads to diseases in the body. Because of the toxic properties of sugar, insulin is a very dominant hormone. It's never inactive even if the blood sugar is stable. High insulin also affects other hormones, such as the appetite hormones leptin and ghrelin. Please comment what you make of all of this, because most people I've met that don't believe in the insulin hypothesis, they just claim that it's a myth but don't usually have a lot of arguments to back it up. But I'm eager to know if there's something amiss here. I would definitely say that there's a lot of metabolic advantages to keep both blood sugar and insulin low, because of the things I mentioned, and particularly because of the H complexes. And also because insulin have the ability to release inflammatory cytokines, and that's really something to consider if you have an autoimmune disorder or otherwise problems with inflammation in your body. Then another thing to consider is what type of food is responsible for blood sugar fluctuations. A huge part of it is what I call non-foods, like pasta, rice, bread, etc., that doesn't really contain anything of value. Then there's might be some minerals here and there, but mainly starch or sugars. And when it comes to ready meals, cookies, candy bars, etc., it's even worse. And it does matter what kind of carbs we eat. Not all of them are equally bad. They affect our gut and gut flora in a radically different way. Foods that should affect blood sugar, like beans, white beans, kidney beans, actually give lower blood sugar and insulin response than it should because of the way they interact with the gut flora. Same goes for fruits like citrus fruits and really ripe bananas. So it's not specifically the carb content that matters, but how the body reacts to the foods we eat, how it's broken down, and how it affects cells and host bacteria. What you also want when losing weight is not only a stable blood sugar, but also high glucagon and high adiponectin. Both stimulate the fat loss and breakdown of fatty acids. Further on, you want a fresh liver and bile so that you're fully able to detox yourself. You don't want fluctuating appetite hormones and not too low serotonin, and that's really a risk on the keto diet. Many people get a decrease in the serotonin levels, which increase the risk of binging. You also want to be really careful to bump up your cortisol levels and get stressed adrenals, because a lot of people get a bit too excited when it comes to their weight loss and they push it too far. Their cortisol levels goes through the roof, they get too catabolic, etc. And if you lose a lot of weight fast, your body might misinterpret it as a crisis and start chewing away on your collagen, which gives you wrinkly and saggy skin. So as you can see, there's a lot of important hormonal factors to successful and healthy weight loss, but insulin plays a major part in this. So if you keep it in check, you automatically keep a lot of other hormones in check, and that is the point rather than the insulin itself, in my opinion. So how come some people experience higher blood sugar on the keto diet than before? And well, I'm going to explain that and also why we don't need to worry about it too much. Something that almost no one talks about is that insulin is released in a primary and a secondary phase. First phase has a 10-minute duration, and the second phase starts after the first one and continues for several hours. This is initiated by the influx of glucose to the beta cells of the pancreas, leading to an eventual depolarization and activation of calcium channels that regulate insulin release. Type 2 diabetes is associated with a shift from biphasic to monophasic insulin release, and it is therefore important to establish the cell biology of insulin release kinetics. Interestingly enough, this is also true for diets low in carbohydrates. We actually become monophasic, which leads to a slightly higher blood glucose value than our carb-eating counterparts. However, our insulin is generally a lot lower throughout the day, but we don't tolerate glucose tolerance tests very well. It doesn't mean that we have diabetes or that we're pre-diabetic. Actually, the opposite is true. So is insulin the only fat storing hormone, and do we really need to be in ketosis to lose weight? The answer is actually no to both questions. You don't need to be in ketosis, and it works very well to be a carb burner and lose fat and body weight. And this is how it works. The carbohydrates ensures that the citric acid cycle can take care of all the acetyl groups formed by the fat. Acetyl groups enters the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle by reacting with oxaloacetic acid to form citric acid. The cells therefore need new oxaloacetic acid and form pyruvate ions, which in turn comes from the glycolysis. Sorry, some of these words I have only read and actually never pronounced, so please correct me if I'm wrong. In the absence of acetyl groups, oxaloacetic acid will instead react with each other and form ketones, which drives the beta oxidation, and that is technically how fat burners burn fat in the absence of carbohydrates. So, bottom line, we can eat carbs and burn body fat, but we don't need that extra step. We can just eat fat and burn fat. In my opinion, it's far more effective. Other hormones responsible for fat storage is, for example, ASP, acetylation stimulating protein. This is actually a tongue twister for me to pronounce all these words, but okay, let's continue. I found this hormone or protein as early as 2012, but there's really not much information about it, unfortunately, so my understanding is a bit hazy. In one of my books, I write that the ASP can stimulate fat storage in the absence of insulin, and that is triggered by large amounts of food. It makes sense because given that we overeat, the food need, or the energy from the food rather, need to go somewhere. It can't just stay in the stomach. It will eventually be broken down and stored somewhere, and this is supposedly the role of ASP, which is triggered by fat. In the International Journal of Obesity, I read that ASP can affect the beta cells of the pancreas, and that its effect is dependent on glucose phosphorylation, which means that ASP is probably active during carb intake as well. So feel free to discuss this on the blog or share more information on hormones responsible for fat storage on the keto diet. That would be super interesting to know more about. Last thing to discuss in today's podcast is the role of calories on the keto diet, and I don't give calories much credit, to be honest. I don't count them and I don't care about them. The reason for this is that there's so many other factors that regulate body composition. If we have a positive fat balance for a prolonged period of time, we will gain weight, but the weight gain will be somewhat different. My personal experience is that there's a radical difference in gaining weight on the keto diet and gaining weight on a junk food diet. I think that it will be quite impossible to get that drop-shaped obesity, for example, or obesity in the first place. There is some correlation between energy intake and weight gain, but it's not an absolute correlation, and I think people on the keto diet see this quite clearly after a while. Maybe not at first, but definitely after a few years. And as I said, I've been on the keto diet for 7 years now, so I speak from experience. What really affects the body is how we eat or what we eat, what happens to cell signaling, hormone release, how the food interacts with the gut flora and intestinal wall, etc. Some foods trigger the reward center in the brain, and some food additives increase appetite and get us to eat a lot more than we need or want. Scientists are actually working hard to improve something called mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is an area where food producers are using science to get us more hooked on certain types of foods by improving how they feel against the tongue and palate. That is all part of the experience of addictive foods, and all of these factors are a lot more important to consider than calories. So to improve the success rate for the keto diet, it's important to look for specific foods that we eat on a daily basis. Look for trends and deviations, look for triggers, and see how specific items affect your body. The trick is to really get to know yourself to be able to control your metabolism. This is a super exciting subject, and I could just go on and on, but I won't because I really want to keep this podcast short and to the point. Thanks for listening in, and I really hope you're here for round 2. So don't forget to check the blog highfatfitness.com and recommend this pod to other keto enthusiasts. That's all for me. Thank you and goodbye.